Fans, give it up for your winners and new Rocket League champions of the world, Team BDS!
Team BDS, the latest Rocket League dynasty to take a tumble off of their pedestal, has had a pretty rough go at it this season. Similar to NRG, they were unbeatable in the online era of RLCSX, winning 8 out of 13 tournaments that season and only placing outside of the top 4 once. Out of 85 series that season, they only lost 10 of them. They had a couple of hiccups in the 2021 and 2022 season, but they still won 5 of the tournaments, including the World Championship. Now, they've gone from world champions to being shut out of major contention in just 3 short tournaments over the last fall split. After delivering such a devastating beatdown of everybody in Fort Worth, why are Team BDS suddenly knocked out of the conversation in Europe? Yes, the skill gap has lessened a little bit, but it's not like everybody just figured Team BDS out. That doesn't happen. They've been slowly developing some terrible habits that have now reached a critical mass, and now they're losing to teams that they never would have just a few short months ago. Let's zoom in and take a look. Coming out of the Season 9 Rival Series with a first place finish, Team BDS picked up extra for RLCSX when ClayX decided to retire from competitive play. With the results in the Rival Series, they were confident that they would make a splash in the top of European RLCS, and rightfully so.
Then, no! Monkey Moon will try again, and he does! Oh my goodness! Monkey Moon marches BDS to the RLCS!
With their incredibly consistent and well-rounded playstyle, they were able to best all of the top teams in Europe with ease. The playstyle graphs that I'll use in this video are generated with a machine learning algorithm that I wrote. 5 playstyles are located around the edge of the radar graph, and each point in a player's shape represents how close they are to the average of that playstyle. On the edge of the circle is the average, and the middle of the circle is 3 or more standard deviations away from that style. That means very far. If you want to learn more in depth about how these graphs are generated, click the first link in the description. And no, you can't use these for your ranked games. I'm sorry. In most of the tournaments, Monkey Moon played the main striker while Mark and Extra covered the rest of the field, set Monkey Moon up for goals, and also played a lot of offense. Extra was always super clutch on defense, and each player was threatening in their own right when they took an offensive stand. A lot of their offense was based off of the high side walls, using them as an anchor to shoot directly on net or make a fast infield passing play. Mark would often run out in front of the play and demo the opponent's defense while Extra and Monkey Moon closed in on the net. In some tournaments, like in Fall Regional 3, Extra took on the striker role with Monkey Moon and abandoned his post as the anchor, and that is usually when we see the team underperform a little bit. Due to Team BDS's domination of Europe, their chart came out looking super aggressive when averaged out for the season. Split into the games that they won and the games that they lost, the playstyles stay almost identical, other than Monkey Moon playing just slightly less of the defensive positions in comparison. BDS were never beating themselves, and any team who wanted to take the win over them really had to earn it, like Vitality did in the last 2 series of the season. With a head-to-head record of 11-1, everybody expected Team BDS to breeze through Vitality and claim their RLCSX crown. But Vitality stepped it up that day, forcing Team BDS into defense and shutting down their striking and playmaking abilities. Team BDS came into the next season of the RLCS as strong as ever, but they were being bested a little bit more often. Compared to the 88% series win rate of RLCSX, BDS won 75% of their series in the first half of the 2021-2022 season. They stayed true to their signature playstyle in all of the tournaments from Fall until Winter Regional 3, where they had their first major hiccup. And you can see the other teams catching up to them manifested in how much more of the defensive positions Extra and Mark needed to play. Averaging the team out across the season while Mark was on the roster, the trend becomes even more clear. They were still winning a majority of their games, so winning styles and average styles were basically the same. However, in the losing graph, the offense disappears. This is shown again in the Winter Regional 3 and the Winter Major, where Monkey Moon continued his striker and first man playstyle, while Extra and Mark retreated away from the offensive third and covered defense. Monkey Moon was being demoed a lot more than normal, and even Mark, who was their demo merchant, had a demo differential in the negatives in Regional 3. Team BDS's rotations broke down, which lowered the effectiveness of their offense and defense, and it gave other teams the opportunities to score. Mark's shot conversion rate plummeted at the Winter Major, sealing their fate at that tournament. Their final match of the Winter Major was against FaZe Clan, a North American powerhouse who was the only team to take down Team BDS at the previous LAN. BDS played very differently against FaZe than they do on average. Mark by 8 played as the lead on offense while Monkey Moon took Mark's normal spot on the rotation, and Extra played quite defensively. In the time between their rematch, FaZe dropped Illusion in favor of Seiko, and they continued to hold a top spot in North America. Their new playstyle was all offense all the time, and their match against Team BDS was no different. Their chart against BDS in this tournament looks like an arrow pointing directly at Striker, while BDS's chart shows a striking lack of offense and midfield play. At this point in the tournament, everybody on the desk was shocked that Team BDS were in this lower bracket position. They were singing praises for Extra and especially Monkey Moon, but everybody had questions about Mark and said that he really needed to step it up for the team to make it through. The series started out with a 90-second onslaught from FaZe as they controlled the entire pitch, and after flustering BDS's defense, Seiko dropped a pass from his team onto Monkey Moon, who ended up own-goaling. After a frustrating opening, BDS tried to go full force on their offense to switch the momentum to their side, but they were constantly shut down by FaZe. They double committed constantly, they scrambled and panic flipped, and they were generally slow to the ball. Clearly, they were having some issues. It only got worse for BDS in the next game while FaZe walked all over them. FaZe scored 2 goals with constant challenges and fast infield passes, while BDS continuously threw away the ball and had any decent offensive chances easily intercepted. In the third game, they got super sloppy and couldn't get a single play to go their way, while FaZe continued to elevate even higher. FaZe shut down solo plays, challenged the ball high up in the air and off the side walls, and turned every ball they stole from BDS immediately into a super threatening attack. FaZe got the second perfect sweep ever in RLCS history, and it was against what was widely considered the best team in the world. The recent poor results caused Team BDS to drop Mark by 8 from the starting roster and pick up Seiko from Endpoint CEX, making BDS a fully French super team. Let's talk about all the interesting dynamics that go into making a roster change on a top team, especially right in the middle of a season. As a general rule, if you can't afford to have any poor results during the acclimatization period, you want to pick up someone who fits the playstyle of the departing player as perfectly as possible. As a personal example, when I was working with Flipside Tactics around Season 6 of the RLCS, we were faced with a pretty tough situation when Yukio decided to leave the team in pursuit of an opportunity with Dignitas. We had a good thing going, and the last thing we wanted to do was drastically change our playstyle going right into another major. Out of the players who were available at the time, we ended up going with Speed, who was a perfect playstyle match for Yukio, and Flipside went on to win WSOE against the same teams who bested them shortly before at the RLCS 6 World Championship. BDS, put in this same position, did not decide to go that route. Mark often had a large defensive role on the team, trading back and forth with Extra being that second man to work upfield with Monkey Moon. On Endpoint, Seiko had Monkey Moon's role, always at the front of the pack, scoring the majority of the goals as the team's striker. The idea of trading for a new player and making such a drastic playstyle adjustment in the middle of 2 splits as the best team in the world was insane. But it worked. Seiko and Monkey Moon more or less continued what they were already doing on offense, with Extra continuing to hold down the defense, and it just worked. Seiko and Monkey Moon are both such star players that the slack left in defense didn't even matter. I also want to point out a couple more interesting differences between Mark and Seiko that we'll see come into play later on. Mark was an extremely physical player for BDS and was averaging almost 2 demos per game, while the other 2 barely eked out 1. Seiko did not continue that trend. Another drastic difference is how the players manage boost. After he joined the team, Seiko's boost tank was full for nearly 1/5 of a regulation game, because when he sees available big pads in his path, he will fill up every time whether he needs it or not. On average, he's collecting about 500 more boost per game than will fit in his tank. What's crazy though is he's not actually collecting that much more boost than Mark did, he's just much more efficient at using it. Unsurprisingly, all of this boost collection means that Seiko is rarely at 0 boost. However, we do see Extra lacking in that department more and more as time goes on, despite the fact that he started collecting and stealing more boost when Seiko joined the team. With the new addition to the team leading the charge, Team BDS were right back to form in the spring split, crushing everybody in their path. In the first two regionals, they did not drop a single series. That's 10 wins in a row, and most of them were not close. In Regional 1, Monkey Moon and Seiko both played incredibly aggressive, and Extra barely had to play any defense. Although Seiko is clearly an offensive main, he's making a lot more defensive plays than Mark did as an anchor player, allowing Extra to move up a bit on the field and be part of the offensive equation more often. Regional 2 was the same story, but Monkey Moon was making an uncharacteristically high amount of saves while also scoring even more goals than normal, throwing off his chart just a little bit and moving him into an unrepresented 6 playstyle called Hard Carry. Seriously though, he was absolutely everywhere. They finally met some competition in Regional 3, dropping games to Endpoint and Moist and finishing the tournament in second place. Again, this new playstyle was incredibly consistent. Seiko and Monkey Moon were applying constant, relentless pressure, and Extra was rotating across the whole field playing offense, defense, and everything in between. In the Grand Finals versus Moist, although the series score was 4-2, BDS never lost a game by more than a goal. On top of that, the first 3 wins by Moist were in overtime. If any one of those games went a different way, BDS could have won the series and caused a bracket reset. With Team BDS being a nearly unstoppable force going into the London Major, it was almost certain that they'd take home the trophy. But to everybody's surprise, they didn't win a single game. They lost 3 in a row to Team Secret and 3 in a row to the Pioneers, and they were out. What? How? It's the same reason that they lost at the LA Major. Yes, the playstyle charts show a super defensive style, but that doesn't always mean that they were totally stuck in defense. In fact, they were in their offensive third this tournament for longer than any other to date. They took just as many shots at the net as they always do. It just wasn't working. They had an abysmal average shot conversion rate of around 15% when they're normally in the 25% range and higher. Seiko had a very consistent assist per goal rate of around 75% for the last 3 tournaments, but in this one, he dipped down to 33%. In response, Extra played more upfield and had a way higher assist per goal rate than normal, trying to give the team a fighting chance. Frustrated at their failed offense, they overextended and gave up loads of unnecessary goals, leaving the tournament with a goal differential of -2.5. They have never in the history of the team had a performance so bad. Despite the major setback, they came prepared for the World Championship in Fort Worth, Texas. After such a devastating performance and a long break in between, nobody really knew what to expect out of them. Were they going to prove once again that they were the best in the world? Or were they going to flop against the toughest competition that they've faced so far? Well, they answered that question pretty quickly. They came out the gate swinging harder than they ever have before, flexing an extremely aggressive playstyle where Monkey Moon and Seiko were moving like a well-oiled machine. They breezed through Group A, and it looked like Renegades in version 1 weren't even playing the game. BDS dropped only 1 game to Renegades and swept version 1. After a couple days off, BDS played their first match of the playoff bracket against the other French powerhouse, Carmine Corp. It was really time to show the world what they were made of. The 2 French titans clawed back and forth, each taking big games off each other. Momentum swung wildly, and most games didn't look close no matter which way they went. Game 7 started on Champions Field, and nobody knew what to expect. Both timeouts were already used, and Carmine Corp had just taken their second convincing game win in a row. But when it really mattered, Team BDS stepped up and won the game by 1 goal, clinching the semifinals.
Monkey Moon is on the floor! The champions elect survive an absolute gauntlet from Carmine Corp. Team BDS are your semi-finalists.
They played Furia a few hours later, and although Furia started the series out by winning the first 2 games, Team BDS took their timeout and could not be stopped afterward, sweeping the rest of the series. They went into the finals against G2 with 4 wins in a row under their belt, and they were truly untouchable. G2 played very similarly to Team BDS for the duration of the World Championship, also winning all of their series leading up to the finals. But unlike Team BDS, G2 don't specialize as much in their individual playstyles. While they had varying levels of defensive input throughout the tournament, everybody was right there with each other on offense. Whether it was Atomic, Chicago, or JNaps on the ball, there was no telling what crazy trick they would pull to get the ball in the net. However, when they came up against Team BDS, their assist game was all but shut down, and Chicago, their most aggressive and upfield player, was forced to play constant goal line defense. Coming in hot from their win against Furia, Team BDS scored in just 11 seconds due to some sloppy defense from G2. But G2 scored shortly after when Seiko and Extra overextended themselves on offense and gave G2 a free net. At this point, it looked like this was going to be a back and forth shootout between two of the best offenses in the world. After all, both teams were very similar. They're both known for doing most of their work off of the midfield, flying high in the air and executing deadly, unsavable infield passing plays. But BDS found the rhythm shortly after and totally shut G2 down. After losing game 1 by just 1 goal, G2 tried a different approach. They were able to outshoot BDS by almost double in game 2, and they scored some pretty sick goals. Although they were shaky, it looked like G2 were back in the game. To their dismay though, Team BDS stepped it up again. Every time G2 tried to do anything with the ball, a BDS player was right there to meet them. Remember when BDS played against FaZe and every single one of their offensive opportunities were stolen from the sidewall at midfield or slapped across the field from FaZe's crossbar? Yeah. Now BDS were playing that same tactic and they were doing it perfectly. Game 3 was a stalemate in regulation time, but BDS were in full control for the whole game. Chicago was fully relegated to defense, and G2 could not get a threatening look at the net no matter what they tried. Shortly after the overtime kickoff, Team BDS capitalized on a whifty and won the 3rd game in a row. G2 had one last chance to push back, but they'd have to win 4 in a row to take home the trophy. At this point, it was all but certain that BDS would be the world champions. G2 started out hot with a goal off of kickoff, and then another from Chicago. With that early lead, they became more aggressive, boxing in Team BDS and playing a super physical game, making sure that everything was as awkward as possible for them. They had just found a way to take what BDS was doing with their contained playstyle and throw it right back at them, leveraging the midfield side wall to intercept every attempted solo play, passing play, and clear, slowly suffocating Team BDS in their half. Team BDS has performed poorly in the past when they were subject to heavy physical opponents, and this was no exception. As the game went on though, G2 started losing their grip. Extra scored a clutch goal off of the side wall, and by the time the clock ran out, BDS were looking poised to tie the game. Team BDS carried that same momentum going into Game 5, determined to finish the series. In just 2 seconds, Extra scored a kickoff goal. Shortly after, Extra scored another demoralizing goal, pinching a challenge off of JNaps and watching it bounce into the net from the midfield. Not to be outdone, G2 began wailing on Team BDS's defense with attack after attack, but BDS shooed them away like they were just pesky flies buzzing around the field. Every G2 shot was met with not 1 but 2 defenders. With just 12 seconds left in the game, Monkey Moon scored the final goal, the nail in the coffin for G2. Two Titans with very similar playstyles clashed, and BDS won convincingly. Here, now, Team BDS were far and away the best team in the world. Team BDS looked leagues ahead of the competition at the World Championship. They played against all of the best teams in the world, and while some were competitive, Team BDS was just too good. They were at their peak RLCSX form all over again, and they looked untouchable going into the next season. No matter what roster moves the rest of EU or the world made, there was no way Team BDS were getting pushed off of the peak of the mountain. It was theirs. Right? Except, they did get knocked off. It's not that they started playing poorly. Not right away. They just lost their clutch factor. In 2 tournaments in a row, after sweeping the Swiss stage, they lost their first series of the single elimination bracket. In the Fall Open, they lost 4-3 against Quadrant, and every game was close. Just one play going differently in any of the games where Quadrant won could have meant a very different outcome for BDS. In the Fall Cup, they lost 4-2 to Carmine Corp, and again, all of the games were so close that they could have gone either way. Frustrated with their results and desperate to get back to the top, they fell apart at the Fall Invitational, losing to teams that, in BDS's top form, would stand no chance. Let's break down each tournament. At the Fall Open, Team BDS played some very inconsistent Rocket League. They're known for downloading their opponent and hard countering them no matter their playstyle, but BDS played 3 5-game series in a row with scorelines all over the place. Monkey Moon was their most offensive player, which is pretty unusual for them after Seiko joined. Normally, while being incredibly offensive, he's doing a lot of the dirty work on the field and enabling Seiko's striking capabilities, and that makes the algorithm place him a little bit closer to the assist-heavy first man role, while Seiko's placed closer to the striker role. In this tournament, however, Seiko played a more congruent style, mostly focused on playing anchor and second man and getting a very uncharacteristic 1.75 assists per goal. Extra is shown pointing sky high to anchor and contributing nowhere else on the pitch. All of their opponents played quite differently from each other that tournament, and BDS ultimately fell to a quadrant who was playing true to their normal form in a congruent style where they all share near equal responsibilities on the pitch. Actually quite similar to how Carmine Corp were playing at the World Championship. Team BDS came out swinging much harder in the Fall Cup, winning all of their Swiss series 3-1. Rather than crazy swings between games, BDS were more convincing in these series, showing everybody that the Fall Open was just a fluke and they were here to win. Their style, while quite different to their norm, was more in line with what they had been doing for over half a year now. They played much more congruently than normal, but the marching order was there. Seiko up front, Monkey Moon in the middle, and Extra in the back. But Extra was playing more on the ball than normal, and in turn was not playing as much anchor or defense. They've played like this a couple of times before with success, but that was all the way back in LCSX with Mark on the team. When they came face to face with an on-form Carmine Corp who had averaged a quite similar playstyle to BDS this split, Carmine Corp just did it better. After those 2 tough tournament losses, Team BDS came into the Fall Invitational with their most on-form playstyle so far this split. But despite having that tried and true style, they had their worst performance yet. They easily bested the Monkeys, but they were beaten in a pretty close series by Evil Geniuses right after. They played Williams Resolve next, who played with a similar style to Evil Geniuses, and they lost by even more. They looked like a completely different Team BDS than we had ever seen before. With no lives left to spare, they squeaked out a close 3-2 victory against Tundra. Team Liquid was their gatekeeper into the playoff bracket, and they proved much too strong. They swept Team BDS out of the tournament, ensuring for good that they would not be playing at the Fall Major in Rotterdam. So what gives? If Team BDS were playing their previously untouchable playstyle, why were they knocked out so convincingly? It's simple. That playstyle just isn't working for them anymore. At least, not the way that they're doing it. Teams have found a way to counter BDS, and despite their history of adapting to everything, they have not found a way to break through the new class of top teams in Europe. The most damning evidence, again, is the shot conversion. There's a stark difference between Seiko's shot conversion in the tournaments where they do well versus the tournaments where they don't. When Seiko's offense is ineffective, Monkey Moon's effectiveness takes a dive too. Extra's stays mostly the same since he's usually scoring the cleanup goals as the third man, putting away the ball after the opponent's defense has been sufficiently scrambled. As a response to this less effective offense, Team BDS spent more time out of their defensive third and more time farther upfield and higher in the air, trying to force more mistakes from their opponents by applying more pressure than ever. This overcommitting from the whole team leaves Seiko out to dry as the last defender a lot more than normal. Despite putting the same number of shots on the net as always, their goals were way down. Despite conceding the same number of shots as always, they could not come out clutch and win these games when it really counted. In the Fall Invitational, they let in more than 2 goals per game for the second time ever, only doing worse in that regard at the London Major. Their shots conceded went down from the Fall Cup, but they saved so few of them that the goals conceded doubled. Let's take a look at the final series versus Team Liquid, who would normally have a difficult time taking a series off of Team BDS. This series in round 5 of Swiss determined which team would be knocked out of contention for the Rotterdam Major, so there was a lot on the line. Team Liquid set the tone early with multiple demos against BDS right out of the gate, putting BDS on their back foot. Then, BDS's now chaotic defense started to take shape. On their first big push of the game, all 3 players clustered up and committed for a failed attack, and then all 3 had to scramble back and barely save the counter from Liquid. BDS struggled to gain and hold possession of the ball, and their defensive rotation, if you can even call it that, was a mess. Team Liquid scored the winning goal in overtime with a good demo play on the goal line. Team BDS continued the same strategy in Game 2, going for solo play after solo play and taking ineffective pot shots at Team Liquid's net. They used to find each other on the field in nearly every push and create deadly passing plays, but now they were relying on their opponents to break under the pressure of a solo play. The stack playstyle here is just not effective against a team of Liquid's caliber. On Liquid's first successful attack, they got Team BDS to double commit at a high shot on net, giving Atto the ball. He took a quick shot off the ceiling against Seiko as the last defender and scored it. Team Liquid quickly added to their lead, scoring 2 kickoff goals in a row, exposing Team BDS's complete lack of kickoff strategy and defense. Game 3 sealed the deal for BDS as we saw a continuation of the same mistakes that they'd been making all day. They weren't holding the ball on offense and instead were trying to execute ineffective solo plays. They were clustering up and overcommitting instead of spreading out, and they played sloppy, scrambled defense, unable to even defend their net off of kickoff. While yes, they played their normally winning playstyle in this tournament, they left their chemistry and team play at the door and absolutely failed to execute it the way they always have. And that's where they're at now. We've seen it a few times where they lose their chemistry and flop in a tournament, but this is the longest losing streak that they have ever had. After this series, Turtle said that maybe a break is what Team BDS needs the most, to calm their nerves and mentally reset from the rigorous routines that every professional Rocket League team is subject to. And maybe he's right. I believe that Extra, Monkey Moon, and Seiko are still some of the best players in the world, and I have no doubt that if they can rekindle their chemistry on the field, they can become an unstoppable force once again.
Dancing with devils is dangerous. I need some true intentions, not plastic. It feel like every word building up my casket. Swim through the mentions, blocking up the traffic, and I ain't wanna talk to